I gave a lawful order. She kept talking, so I cuffed her. Because I said so.
There is a fundamental misunderstanding about power in this country. Most people believe that power is derived from the uniform you wear, the badge pinned to your chest, or the weapon you carry on your hip. They believe that authority is a shield, a thick, impenetrable layer of steel that protects them from the consequences of their own actions. I have sat on this bench for 20 years, and if there is one lesson I have learned, it is that the badge is not a shield. It is a target, and when you stand in my courtroom, that target is placed directly over your career, your reputation, and your freedom. People often come into this room expecting a debate. They expect to argue the finer points of the law, to twist the narrative, to plead for mercy based on their circumstances. But I am not here to debate. I am here to restore order. The law is a binary system. You either followed it or you broke it. And on this particular Tuesday, the air in the courtroom was not filled with the usual nervous energy of civilians fighting traffic tickets. It was heavy with something else. It was heavy with the suffocating weight of entitlement. I remember the moment the doors swung open. Usually, when a defendant enters, they walk with their head down, eyes scanning the floor, shoulders hunched in anticipation of judgment. But not this man. Officer Mark Miller didn't walk into my courtroom. He patrolled into it. He was a veteran of the force, 15 years on the job, decorated, respected by his peers, and feared by the community he was sworn to protect. He walked down the center aisle with a stride that suggested he owned the building. His uniform was impeccable, pressed creases sharp enough to cut, boots polished to a mirror shine, and that badge. It caught the fluorescent lights and gleamed with a blinding intensity. The gallery went silent. You could feel the shift in the room. My bailiff, usually a stoic man, shifted uncomfortably in his stance. The court clerk stopped typing. Everyone knew who Miller was. In a city this size, a reputation like his precedes you. He was known as an enforcer, the kind of officer who didn't write tickets, he made examples. But today, the script was flipped. Today, he wasn't the one holding the pen. He was the one standing on the wrong side of the podium, and yet, looking at his face, you would never know it. He stopped at the defense table and didn't even look at me immediately. He turned to the gallery, flashed a brief, dismissive smirk to a colleague sitting in the back row, and then slowly, deliberately, turned his gaze toward the bench. There was no fear in his eyes. There was no respect. There was only a bored impatience, the look of a man who was inconvenienced by a procedural formality he believed was beneath him. He adjusted his collar, leaned one elbow on the podium, a violation of protocol that I noted immediately, and waited. He expected a professional courtesy. He expected the blue wall to extend into my chambers. I let him wait. Silence is a judge's most powerful weapon. I didn't speak. I didn't acknowledge him. I simply opened his file, the pages rustling loudly in the quiet room. I read through the charges, line by line, letting the seconds tick by. I could see his patience wearing thin. He shifted his weight, tapped his fingers on the wood. He was used to controlling the timeline, to dictating the pace of every interaction. But in here, time belongs to me. The charges were not minor. This wasn't a parking violation or a bureaucratic error. The file in front of me detailed an incident that made my stomach turn, not because of the violence, but because of the pettiness. It was an abuse of power so flagrant, so casual, that it revealed a man who had long ago forgotten that he was a servant of the public. He had arrested a young woman, a single mother, for obstruction of justice simply because she had questioned why he was towing her car from a legal spot. But it wasn't just the arrest. It was the humiliation. The Bodycam footage, which I had reviewed in my chambers, showed a man drunk on his own authority, mocking her tears, laughing as he put her in handcuffs in front of her screaming child. "Officer Miller," I finally said, my voice low, cutting through the stagnant air. I didn't look up from the file. "Do you know where you are?" He chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. "I'm in traffic court, Your Honor, though I'm not sure why this couldn't have been handled by a phone call to my captain." That was the moment. That was the spark. He didn't see a judge. He saw a bureaucrat. He believed that his badge granted him immunity from the very laws he enforced with an iron fist. He believed that because he wore the uniform, he was the protagonist of this story. He was about to find out that in my courtroom, Arrogance is not a defense, it is an aggravating factor. I looked up, locking eyes with him. I took off my reading glasses and placed them slowly on the desk. You are not in traffic court, officer. You are in the one place left in this city where your badge means absolutely nothing. The silence that followed my statement was not the silence of understanding. It was the silence of disbelief. Officer Miller blinked once, slowly, as if he were trying to process a language he didn't speak. In his world, the hierarchy was clear. He gave orders, and people obeyed. Judges were usually just the final rubber stamp on his paperwork, a necessary administrative step to validate his authority on the street. To be challenged, to be told that his badge held no currency here, was a shock to his system. But shock, for a man like him, quickly turns into aggression. He straightened up, abandoning the casual lean on the podium. His hand instinctively drifted toward his belt, not to a weapon, of course, but to the radio clipped there, a subconscious reminder of his connection to backup, to the Brotherhood in blue. With all due respect, Your Honor, he said, the word respect dripping with open disdain. I don't think you understand the situation. I didn't write this citation for my health. The defendant was non-compliant. She was disorderly. I have a job to do, and I don't appreciate being lectured on how to do it by someone who sits in an air-conditioned room all day. I watched him speak. I watched the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes narrowed. He was trying to intimidate me. It was a tactic that undoubtedly worked on the street. It probably worked on teenagers, on terrified mothers, on people who didn't know their rights. He was performing the role of the tough cop, a performance he had likely perfected over 15 years. But in this room, he was not the director. He was just an actor who had forgotten his lines. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't bang the gavel. I simply leaned forward, clasping my hands together on top of the file. Non-compliant, I repeated, tasting the word. Disorderly. These are interesting words, officer. They are catch-all terms, aren't they? They are the words we use when someone dares to ask why. They are the words we use when a citizen forgets that they are supposed to be afraid. I turned my gaze to the other side of the courtroom. Sitting there, looking small and fragile in a chair that seemed too big for her, was Sarah Jenkins. She was the woman Miller had arrested. She wasn't looking at me, and she certainly wasn't looking at Miller. She was staring at her hands, which were trembling in her lap. She was 24 years old, a nursing student, and a mother. She had no prior record, not even a speeding ticket, and yet she sat there with the terrified posture of a career criminal. This is what men like Miller do. They don't just enforce the law, they break the spirit. They turn citizens into subjects. Miss Jenkins, I called out softly. She flinched, as if I had thrown something at her. She slowly raised her eyes to meet mine. They were red-rimmed, swollen from crying. You are charged with obstruction of justice and disorderly conduct. Officer Miller claims you refused a lawful order and caused a scene that endangered public safety. How do you plead? Her voice was barely a whisper. Not guilty, Your Honor. Miller scoffed. It was loud enough for the microphone to pick up, a sharp, ugly sound that echoed through the room. He shook his head, looking at the ceiling as if he were begging for patience, dealing with a petulant child. This is a waste of time, he muttered, loud enough for me to hear. She was screaming at me. She refused to step back from her vehicle. She was lucky I didn't add resisting arrest to the sheet. I turned my eyes back to him. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Lucky, I said. You think she should feel lucky, officer, because you decided not to ruin her life further? I think she should learn respect, Miller shot back, his voice rising. I think people in this city need to remember who keeps them safe. If I tell someone to move, they move. If I tell them to be quiet, they be quiet. It's officer safety 101. If she has a problem with that, she can file a complaint with the department. But right now, she broke the law. He was digging his own grave with every word, and he didn't even realize he was holding the shovel. He was so convinced of his own righteousness, so blinded by the absolute power he wielded on the street, that he couldn't see the trap closing around him. He thought this was a he said, she said scenario. He thought his word, the word of a veteran officer, would automatically outweigh the word of a terrified young woman. In 99 courtrooms out of 100, he would be right. But he had forgotten one crucial detail. He had forgotten that we live in an age of surveillance. You seem very certain of your version of events, officer, I said, opening a laptop on my bench. You describe a chaotic scene. You describe a woman out of control, a threat to your safety. You describe yourself as a professional trying to maintain order in a volatile situation. That's exactly what happened, Miller said, crossing his arms. I wrote it in my report. It's sworn testimony. Yes, I said, tapping a key on the computer. The large monitors mounted on the walls of the courtroom flickered to life. Your report is indeed sworn testimony, which makes what we are about to see very problematic for you. Miller frowned, his arms uncrossing slightly. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. He glanced at the screen, then back at me. You see, officer, I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. The badge gives you authority, yes, but the body camera gives me the truth. And unfortunately for you, the truth does not seem to agree with your report. The video began to play on the large screens mounted on the courtroom walls. The audio was crisp, cutting through the silence of the room like a knife. It didn't show a riot. It didn't show a threat to public safety. It showed a quiet suburban street on a sunny afternoon. And it showed Miss Jenkins standing by her car, holding a bag of groceries, looking confused and terrified. In your report, Officer Miller, you wrote, and I quote, "The defendant adopted an aggressive fighting stance and lunged toward me." I paused the video. On the screen, Miss Jenkins was clutching her grocery bag with both hands against her chest, a universal gesture of self-protection. Her feet were planted together. She wasn't lunging. She was shrinking. "Explain this to me," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "Is this what you call a fighting stance? Is a bag of milk and a loaf of bread considered a deadly weapon in your precinct?" Miller shifted on his feet. The arrogance was still there, but it was starting to crack around the edges. He cleared his throat, looking at the screen with disdain. "The camera angle is misleading, Your Honor. You can't see the way she was looking at me. It was threatening. You had to be there to feel the energy." "Energy," I repeated. "We are not discussing metaphysics, officer. We are discussing the law. Let's continue." I pressed play. The video showed Miller towering over the woman. He wasn't de-escalating the situation. He was igniting it. He was shouting commands so fast that no reasonable person could follow them. "Get back. Hands where I can see them. Stop moving. Give me your ID." He was creating chaos where there was none, a tactic designed to confuse a suspect so they inevitably make a mistake. And when Miss Jenkins, tears streaming down her face, asked, "Why are you doing this?" "I didn't do anything." Miller didn't answer with a citation code. He didn't answer with a legal reason. On the screen, the Miller in the video laughed. It was a cruel, bullying sound. "You want to know why?" The digital Miller sneered. "Because I said so. That's why." I paused the video again. The echo of that laugh seemed to hang in the air of the courtroom. I looked at the real Miller standing before me. He wasn't laughing now. His face had gone a shade paler. He knew how that sounded. He knew that because I said so is the logic of a tyrant, not a peace officer. "That right there," I said, pointing a finger at the frozen image of his sneering face. "That is the problem. You believe that your will is the law. You believe that your personal annoyance justifies the deprivation of a citizen's liberty. You didn't arrest her for a crime, officer. You arrested her for contempt of cop. You arrested her because she bruised your ego." "She was questioning my authority," Miller snapped, his temper flaring again. "If I let one person question me on the street, the whole block loses respect. I have to maintain control. It's about safety. Mine and hers." "Safety?" I asked, my voice rising just an octave. "Let's watch the rest." I let the video run to the end. The arrest itself was hard to watch. Miller grabbed Miss Jenkins by the arm, forcefully spinning her around. She wasn't resisting. She was limp with shock. But as he clicked the cuffs onto her wrists, he leaned in close to her ear. The microphone on his chest picked up his whisper perfectly. It was quiet, intimate, and chilling. "You should have just kept your mouth shut, sweetheart. Now you're going to learn a hard lesson." The video ended. The screen went black, but the damage was done. The truth was out in the open, naked and undeniable. The gallery was murmuring now, a low hum of anger and disbelief. Miller stood there, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles working. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that the narrative he had constructed, the hero cop dealing with the unruly citizen, had just been obliterated. I closed the laptop slowly. You wrote a report charging this woman with obstruction of justice and disorderly conduct. You swore an oath that the contents of that report were true. But we just watched a video that proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the only person being disorderly on that street was you. And the only person obstructing justice is standing right in front of me. Miller's eyes darted around the room, looking for an exit, looking for an ally. He found none. It was a stressful day, he muttered, the excuse weak and hollow. Context matters. Context does matter, I agreed. And the context is that you lied. You used the power of the state to punish a woman for having a voice. You fabricated a crime to cover up your own bullying. And you walked into my courtroom today thinking that I would be complicit in your corruption. I picked up my pen. The scratching sound it made on the paper was the only noise in the room. I am dismissing all charges against Miss Jenkins with prejudice. They are expunged. They never happened. Miss Garcia let out a sob of relief, burying her face in her hands. But I wasn't finished. I wasn't even close to finished. I looked back at Miller. The target on his chest was glowing bright red. But we are not done, Officer Miller. You came here seeking a judgment, and you are going to get one. But it is not the judgment you expected. You are free to go, Miss Jenkins, I said to the young woman. She stood up, her legs shaking so badly she had to grab the table for support. She looked at me, then at the officer, and for the first time, the fear in her eyes was replaced by confusion. She had expected to be crushed by the machinery of the state. She hadn't expected the machine to turn its gears against one of its own operators. She gathered her things and hurried out of the courtroom, the heavy doors closing behind her with a sound of finality. Now, it was just us. The gallery was silent, the air thick with anticipation. Officer Miller made a move to collect his hat, his body language screaming that he considered this matter concluded. He had lost the case, sure, but in his mind, that was the end of it. He would go back to his cruiser, back to his beat, and find someone else to torment. He thought this was just a bad day at the office. Officer Miller, I said, my voice stopping him in his tracks. I did not dismiss you. He turned back, his face flushing a deep, angry red. The case is dismissed, Your Honor. The defendant is gone. Unless you plan on writing me a parking ticket, I have a shift to finish. You have a shift to finish, I repeated, leaning back in my chair. That is an optimistic assessment of your future, officer. You seem to labor under the delusion that what just happened was a simple disagreement over evidence. It was not. What happened is that you stood in my courtroom, raised your right hand, swore an oath to tell the truth, and then submitted a document that you knew, absolutely knew, was a lie. I picked up the police report again, holding it up like it was a contaminated object. In the legal world, we have a name for this. It isn't a mistake. It isn't an error in judgment. It is perjury. And when a police officer commits perjury, it doesn't just poison one case. It poisons every single case they have ever touched. Miller slammed his hand down on the defense table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I am a decorated officer. I have put murderers behind bars. I have taken guns off the street. You're going to lecture me about integrity because I got a little creative with paperwork on a disorderly conduct charge? You have no idea what it's like out there. I don't care what it is like out there, I snapped, my voice finally rising, cracking the calm facade just enough to show the fury underneath. I care about what happens in here. In here, the truth is the only currency that matters, and you just declared bankruptcy. I stood up then, the black robe swirling around me. I walked down from the bench, moving toward the podium where he stood. It is rare for a judge to leave the bench, but I wanted him to understand that the distance between us, the protection of the podium, was gone. I wanted to look him in the eye, on level ground. Do you know what the Brady list is? Officer? I asked, my voice low and cold. He flinched. He knew exactly what it was. Every cop knows. It is the blacklist. It is a list of officers who have been caught lying, who have been deemed untrustworthy by the prosecutor's office. Once your name is on that list, your career is effectively over. No defense attorney will ever let you testify again. Every arrest you make will be challenged. You become a liability to the department, a cancer to the precinct. You can't do that, he whispered, the arrogance finally draining out of him, replaced by the dawn of genuine panic. Over this? Over a traffic stop? You would ruin 15 years of service over this? I am not ruining anything, I said, stepping closer. You did this. You made the choice. You decided that your ego was more important than the law. You decided that punishing that woman for a bruised pride was worth sacrificing your integrity. You traded your honor for a power trip, and now the bill has come due. He looked around the room, his eyes wide. He saw the court reporter typing furiously. He saw the public defenders in the gallery taking notes. He realized that this wasn't a private reprimand. This was a public execution of his credibility. I am not just referring this matter to internal affairs, I continued, my voice steady and merciless. I am referring this transcript, that video, and your sworn report to the district attorney's office. I am recommending that you be placed on the Brady list immediately. And I am recommending that they review every single arrest you have made in the last 5 years where resisting arrest or disorderly conduct was the primary charge. Miller took a step back, as if I had physically struck him. You're going to open my old cases? I am going to open everything, I promised. Because if you lied about a nursing student with a bag of groceries on a sunny Tuesday afternoon, I can only imagine what you lied about when no one was watching. You didn't just break the law today, Officer Miller. You broke the trust of this entire city, and I will not let you hide behind that badge while you do it. He looked at me with pure hatred, but beneath the hate, there was fear. He was watching his life dismantle in real time. But I wasn't done. The punishment had to fit the arrogance, and I had one more lesson to teach him before he left my courtroom for the last time. Officer Miller stood frozen. The threat of the Brady list had finally pierced the armor of his entitlement. He looked at the court reporter, then at the gallery, and finally back at me. The color had drained from his face, leaving him looking less like the imposing enforcer who had marched in here, and more like a man realizing he was standing on a trapdoor that had already opened. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and desperation. I am a good cop. I put my life on the line every day. You can't judge my entire career based on 5 minutes of video. You weren't there. You didn't feel the threat. I didn't have to be there, I replied, my voice calm but heavy, because you brought there in here. That is the beauty of the law, officer. It doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't care about your adrenaline. It cares about facts. And the fact is, you are not a good cop who made a mistake. You are a dangerous cop who got caught. I walked back up the steps to the bench and sat down. The height difference was restored, but the dynamic had shifted completely. He was no longer a peer. He was a defendant in spirit, if not in title. Let's talk about that badge, I said, pointing a finger at the silver shield on his chest. It gleamed under the harsh lights, a symbol he had weaponized against the very people he was sworn to protect. You think that badge belongs to you? You think it is a prize you won? That badge is a loan, Officer Miller. It is a loan from the citizens of this city. They lend you their authority. They lend you the power to take away a person's freedom. And in exchange, they ask for one thing, just one thing. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. They ask for the truth. They ask that when you write a report, when you testify in court, when you put a human being in handcuffs, you do it with absolute integrity. Because without that integrity, you are just a man with a gun and a God complex. Miller looked down at his chest, as if seeing the badge for the first time. The silence in the room was absolute. No one moved, no one breathed. You broke that contract today, I continued. You looked at Miss Jenkins, a nursing student, a mother, a citizen with rights, and you decided she didn't matter. You decided she was just a prop in your performance of power. You humiliated her because you could. You lied about her because you thought no one would check. And you came into my courtroom assuming that I was part of your club, that I would protect the Brotherhood over the Constitution. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to offer another excuse, another justification about respect or safety, but the words died in his throat. He realized there was no argument left to make. The video had stripped him naked. Do you know what keeps me up at night, officer? I asked, my voice softening into something dangerously quiet. It isn't the criminals. It isn't the thieves or the drug dealers. I know what they are. I know what to expect from them. No, what keeps me up is the thought of how many people like Sarah Jenkins are sitting in jail cells right now because of officers like you. How many pleas were signed because a defendant was too scared to fight a police report? How many lives were ruined because a judge didn't have a video? How many times have you done this and gotten away with it? Miller looked away, unable to hold my gaze. The shame was finally starting to set in, or perhaps it was just the realization of the consequences. I cannot undo the fear you caused her, I said. I cannot unring the bell of that arrest, but I can make sure that from this moment forward, your word is worth exactly what it should be. Nothing. I reached for my gavel. Usually, it is a tool to end a session, a punctuation mark on a judgment. But today, it felt like a weapon. You came here expecting to teach a citizen a lesson about respect. Instead, you are leaving with a lesson about accountability. And unlike the lesson you tried to teach Miss Jenkins, this one is going to stick. I want you to look at that empty chair, I said, gesturing to where the young woman had sat moments ago. That is who you serve. Not your captain, not your union rep, not your ego. Her. And you failed her. Completely. Miller looked at the empty chair. For a second, just a second, I saw his shoulders slump. The facade of the tough guy crumbled, leaving behind a man who knew he had just lost everything. Get out of my courtroom, I said, my voice cold as ice, before I find a reason to put you in a cell next to the people you arrested. Officer Miller turned on his heel. The sharp, military precision of his movements was gone, replaced by a stiff, jerky awkwardness. He walked down the center aisle, the same aisle he had patrolled down just 20 minutes ago like a conquering king. But the walk back was different. It was the longest walk of his life. The gallery, which had been silent out of fear, was now silent out of awe. Every pair of eyes was glued to his back. They were witnessing something they thought was impossible. A man in uniform being held to the same standard as the people he arrested. The heavy wooden doors swung shut behind him with a dull thud, sealing him out of the sanctuary of the court. The sound seemed to break the spell in the room. I heard a collective exhale, a release of breath that 40 people had been holding simultaneously. It was the sound of a pressure valve being released. I didn't move immediately. I sat there, watching the closed doors, letting the gravity of what just happened settle into the wood and the stone of the room. I knew what would happen next. I knew the machinery that was already starting to turn outside those doors. Miller would be on the phone with his union representative within minutes. The narrative would be spun. They would say I was a judicial activist. They would say I was anti-police. They would say I didn't understand the realities of the street. But inside these walls, none of that mattered. I turned my gaze to the back of the room. There were 2 other officers sitting there, waiting for their own cases to be called. They were young, rookies likely, their uniforms still stiff and new. They had watched the entire exchange with wide, unblinking eyes. They had watched their senior officer, a man they likely looked up to, get dismantled not by a criminal, but by the truth. You two, I said, my voice carrying easily across the distance. They jumped, straightening up in their seats as if they had been caught sleeping in class. Stand up, I ordered. They scrambled to their feet, hats in hands, looking terrified. They weren't in trouble, not technically, but they had just seen a titan fall, and they were wondering if the lightning was about to strike them next. Did you watch that? I asked. Did you see what just happened? Yes, Your Honor, the taller one stammered. Good, I said, because that was the most important day of your training. Forget the academy, forget the tactical drills. What you just saw is the reality of your profession. You have a choice to make. Every single day you put on that uniform, you can be Mark Miller. You can believe that the badge makes you a god. You can bully and lie and intimidate. And for a while, it will work. People will fear you. The system will protect you. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. But eventually, you will walk into a room like this. Eventually, you will meet a judge like me. And when you do, that badge won't save you. It will sink you. I looked at the second officer, a young woman who looked like she was barely out of high school. Or, I continued, my voice softening just a fraction, you can remember Sarah Jenkins. You can remember that your job is not to conquer the community, but to serve it. You can remember that respect is earned, not taken. If you treat people with dignity, you won't need to lie on a report. You won't need to turn off your body cam. You won't need to fear the truth. Do you understand me? Yes, Your Honor, they said in unison, their voices shaking but clear. Sit down, I said. They sat, but I could see the change in their posture. They weren't leaning back anymore. They were alert. They were checking their own consciences. That is the ripple effect of accountability. One act of justice doesn't just fix one case. It sends a shockwave through the entire system. It reminds everyone from the rookies to the veterans that someone is watching. I turned back to my clerk. Ziggy was looking at me with a mixture of shock and pride. He had seen me handle thousands of cases, but he knew this one was different. This one was a declaration of war against corruption. Call the next case, I said, my voice returning to its usual business-like tone. But before the next file could be opened, before the next defendant could step forward, the side door to the courtroom, the one reserved for court staff and attorneys, burst open. It wasn't a lawyer, it wasn't a bailiff. It was a man in a suit, breathless, holding a briefcase like a shield. He had the frantic, sweaty look of a man who had just run up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was too slow. I recognized him immediately. It was the assistant district attorney, the head of the division that handled police misconduct cases. Usually, I wouldn't see him unless there was a grand jury convening. He didn't wait for permission to approach. He walked straight to the bench, ignoring the protocol, ignoring the gallery. Judge Boyd, he said, his voice tight with urgency. We need to talk, immediately, in chambers. I looked at him over the rim of my glasses. I am in the middle of a session, counselor. Whatever you have to say can wait. It can't wait, he hissed, leaning in so the microphones wouldn't pick him up. Miller just called the chief. They are threatening to pull every single officer from your courtroom detail effective immediately. They're calling it a safety boycott. They're saying you're hostile to law enforcement. I looked at the AD. I looked at the empty spot where Miller had stood. And then a smile, a cold, dangerous smile, touched the corners of my lips. Let them, I said. The assistant district attorney stared at me, his mouth slightly ajar. He was a political creature, a man used to backroom deals and plea bargains, a man who viewed the justice system as a series of handshakes and favors. He had never encountered a moment where someone simply refused to play the game. You can't be serious, Judge, he whispered, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. If they pull the detail, you are in here alone. No bailiff, no security. You have 40 criminal defendants sitting in that gallery. This is a safety issue. It is a control issue, I corrected, my voice cutting through his panic like a scalpel. They are not pulling the detail because they are worried about my safety, counselor. They are pulling the detail to show me who they think runs this building. They are trying to prove that without their guns, my gavel is just a piece of wood. I stood up again, walking to the edge of the bench. I looked past the ADA, past the terrified rookies, and addressed the room at large. A safety boycott, I said, letting the phrase roll off my tongue with clinical detachment. It is a tactic as old as organized labor, but when applied by law enforcement, it looks less like a strike and more like a protection racket. The message is clear. Let us operate above the law, or we will leave you to the wolves. They believe that by withdrawing their physical presence, they withdraw the authority of this court. I looked down at the ADA. Go back to your phone. Call the chief. Tell him that if he wants to pull his officers, he is free to do so. But tell him this. If he abandons his post because he cannot handle the accountability of one bad apple, he is not punishing me. He is confessing. He is confessing that his department operates not on duty, but on leverage. Judge, please, the ADA pleaded, just recess for the day. Let tempers cool. We can fix this Miller thing. We can work out a suspension instead of the Brady list. Don't start a war. I didn't start the war, I said, sitting back down. I am just finishing the battle. Now, sit down or get out. I have a docket to clear. The ADA stood there for a moment, paralyzed by indecision. Then, realizing he was winning no allies here, he turned and practically ran out the side door, presumably to try and talk the police chief off the ledge. And then, it happened. The threat became real. My bailiff, a man named Henderson who had stood by my right hand for 6 years, looked at his radio. He listened to an order coming through his earpiece. His face went pale. He looked at me, his eyes filled with genuine apology. Your Honor, he said, his voice cracking. It's the commander. All units are ordered to return to the precinct for emergency retraining. Immediately, I nodded. I didn't blame Henderson. He was a pawn in a game played by kings and knights. He had a pension to protect. Go, I said softly. Do your job, deputy. Henderson hesitated, then unclipped the radio from his belt, gave a stiff nod, and walked out. The 2 rookies in the back row followed him, heads down, ashamed. The heavy doors clicked shut. For the first time in 20 years, I was alone on the bench. No badge, no gun, no uniform. Just me, a wooden desk, and a room full of people who had been dragged here by the very system that had just walked out the door. The silence this time was different. It wasn't tense. It was curious. The people in the gallery, the defendants, the mothers, the teenagers, looked around. They realized the guards were gone. They realized the enforcers had left the building. In a typical movie script, this is the moment where chaos erupts. This is the moment where the criminals take over. But this isn't a movie. And these aren't villains. They are citizens. I picked up my gavel. I didn't slam it. I held it gently. It seems, I said, my voice calm and echoing in the unguarded room, that the state has decided to leave us to our own devices. They believe that without the threat of force, this room will descend into anarchy. They believe that you only respect the law because you fear the punishment. I looked at the faces in the crowd. I saw Jose, the man waiting for his hearing on a suspended license. I saw a young woman holding a crying baby. I saw an old man clutching a cane. I do not believe that, I told them. I believe that you are here because you want to be heard. I believe you respect this court, not because of the guns at the door, but because of the fairness at the bench. So we are going to continue. We are going to finish the calendar. And we are going to show the chief of police that justice does not require a weapon. It only requires the truth. Next case, I called out. A young man stood up in the 3rd row. He looked nervous, glancing at the empty bailiff's station. He walked slowly to the podium. State your name, I said. David Rossi. Your Honor, he said. Mr. Rossi, you are charged with failure to yield. How do you plead? Guilty, Your Honor, he said. But can I explain? You can always explain in this room, I said. Proceed. For the next hour, we worked. The ADA was gone. The police were gone. But the court functioned perfectly. Better, even. The tension was gone. Without the looming presence of the blue wall, people spoke more freely. They admitted their mistakes. They accepted their fines. They listened to my rulings. We proved, case by case, that authority is not something you take by force. It is something you earn by presence. But as the final case concluded and the sun began to dip lower in the sky, the side door opened again. This time, it wasn't the ADA. It wasn't Henderson. It was Officer Miller. And he wasn't in uniform. He wore a gray polo shirt and jeans. Without the Kevlar vest, he looked smaller. Without the utility belt, his hands seemed not to know where to rest, fidgeting at his sides. But the most striking absence was the badge. The spot on his chest where the silver shield had gleamed for 15 years was empty. Officer Miller walked down the aisle. The gallery was empty now, save for Ziggy, my clerk, who was packing up the files. Miller stopped at the podium, the same piece of wood he had leaned on with such arrogance hours earlier. Now, he gripped it like a lifeline. The chief called, Miller said. His voice was flat, hollowed out. I'm suspended, indefinitely, pending the DA's review. I didn't smile. There is no joy in watching a man fall, even when he deserves it. I expected as much, I replied, closing the final file on my desk. The Brady list is not a suggestion, Mr. Miller. It is a career ender. He looked up at me. The anger was gone. The fear was gone. What remained was a strange, dull confusion. I wanted to ask you something, he said. Off the record. There is no off the record in this room, I said, but you may speak. Why? He asked. You could have just dismissed the ticket. You could have just chewed me out and sent me back to patrol. Why burn the whole house down? I'm one cop. What does destroying me actually change? I took off my glasses and rubbed the bridge of my nose. It had been a long day. You still don't see it, I said quietly. You think this was personal. You think I targeted you because I didn't like your attitude. But you were never the target, Miller. You were the symptom. I stood up and walked to the edge of the bench, looking down at the man who had walked in here as a king and was leaving as a ghost. I didn't destroy you to change you, I told him. It is too late for that. You decided who you were a long time ago. I did it for the two rookies sitting in the back row. I did it for Henderson, my bailiff, who had to choose between his pension and his conscience. I did it for Sarah Jenkins, who needed to see that the monster under her bed could bleed. Miller shook his head slowly. They're going to come for you, you know. The union, the chief. They won't forget this. Let them come, I said. They have guns. They have political favors. They have the media. But I have something they lost a long time ago. What's that? Miller asked. I have the ability to sleep at night, I said. Miller stood there for a long moment, absorbing the words. Then, without another sound, he turned and walked out of the courtroom. He walked out into a city where he was no longer a predator, but just another citizen, subject to the same laws as everyone else. I watched the doors close. The room was finally quiet. The light was fading through the high windows, turning the dust motes into dancing gold. People often ask me why I sit on this bench. They ask why I fight battles that seem impossible to win. They see the corruption, the arrogance, the broken system, and they ask, does it even matter? Tonight, somewhere in this city, Sarah Jenkins is sitting at her dinner table. She is not in a jail cell. She is not crying in a holding area. She is with her child. She is free. And somewhere else, two rookie officers are starting their night shift. And maybe, just maybe, when they pull someone over tonight, they will remember the sound of Mark Miller's career shattering on the floor of my courtroom. They will remember that the badge is heavy and it can be taken away. That is why I do it. I gathered my robe, feeling the weight of the fabric on my shoulders. It is a heavy garment, the black robe. It can hide a lot of things, but it cannot hide the truth. Justice is not a natural state. The world is cruel. The strong eat the weak. Power corrupts. Justice is something we have to manufacture day by day, case by case, decision by decision. It is a fantasy we try to make real. And today, in this room, it felt real enough. Court is adjourned, I whispered to the empty room. I turned off the desk lamp, plunging the bench into shadow, and walked out into the night.